In our previous lecture, our previous topic, we were asking some questions about church history, about the history of Christian missions, the advancement of the church. The three questions were, number one, are there different perspectives from which we can view the history of Christian missions and the advancement of the church globally? The answer to that question was yes. We talked about several of those, described them. A second question, how has the church actually grown over the course of time? Again, different perspectives from which we can view this question. And then thirdly, what are the historical structures for the growth of the church? Kind of drawing from Ralph Winter's little article and his big takeaway that the danger in missions, or in ministry generally, we could add, I think, but certainly in missions, is that we become so entrenched in one way of doing things that we cut ourselves off from even the possibility of good, solid biblical innovation. And so that brings us then to lecture outline, lecture topic number 7. This is the first 1800 years, part 2. And I've pretty much given you what I want you to have here. There's a lot of detail here, a lot of information. Your first thought probably in looking at this material is what? Dr. Martin wants me to memorize all of that for the midterm exam? No, I don't. I do want you to look over it and just spend some time with this information. But you'll notice that with each of Latourette eras, missions in the apostolic era, in the early church, and on down, each of these eras, I've divided these into various components. You'll see the same outline repeated from era to era. Background, just some general historical background. Missionaries, obviously I do not name all the missionaries who labored during that period, but some key missionaries, some key names that I would want you to be familiar with. Fields, and here is just my attempt to name some of the new areas into which the gospel expands during that era to show the advance of the gospel geographically. Methods. You could also replace that word methods with the term that we just used in the previous lecture. Structures. Some key structures that would be employed in each of these eras. These are not exhaustive lists of methods or strategies or structures that would have been used or employed in that particular historical era. But these are some key ones, key structures or key methods. And there's going to be some overlap also. Some of these are not unique to any one particular era, but still they are, you see them sort of prominently in these respective historical periods. And then the extent of growth. And so I try to just give you a word, kind of a summary statement about, okay, by the end of this era, by the end of this particular period, how has the church grown out into the world? And you see that very same outline through the first 5 headings of this outline. You do not see the same outline or structure for Roman numeral 6 and Roman numeral 7. There's a reason for that. When we come to Roman numeral 6 and 7, missions in the 20th century, and then missions in the postmodern era, we at that point have arrived at the place in history in which we live, the time in which we live, or immediately before our time. And so when we begin to talk about some of these things, we're actually going to dig down a little bit into the 20th century and the 21st century after the midterm exam. And so we're actually going to come back and spend some time on Roman numeral 6 and 7 in a way that we will not for 1 through 5. Now, having said all that, I want you to look at this outline. I want you to sort of familiarize yourself with the material that is here. But the question that remains on everyone's mind is, okay, but what do I need to know for the midterm exam? All right, here I'm about to tell you. I want you to focus on that 4th heading in each era, methods. Methods. And and this is on the heels of the conversation that we just had about structures. And so probably what I'm going to do on the exam, just kind of give you a heads up, probably what I'm going to do on the exam is create a matching question out of this material. And so I will have the different eras listed in the one column on the left. And then on the other column, I would not list every method that I've mentioned here, but I'd pull one out. And so, for instance, when we get over to missions and the Reformation, Roman numeral 4, you look down at the methods. I might mention the Moravian methods. Moravian methods, pietism, I've given you in a block there. So I might list Moravian methods. I'll tell you what I need to add to the Reformation period, and you might just jot this down on the paper that you have before you or on your computer. I thought I had it here. Preaching. I mean, this is the hallmark of the Protestant Reformation, isn't it? No longer is the focus on the Mass and the ritual and the ceremony of the Roman Catholic Church, but rather on the preaching of the Word. So you need to add preaching. I could put preaching, and you would match that up with the Reformation, though preaching has been done in every era, in every century. So I'll do something like that with this material. And what this does then, we've done a sprint through the first 1,800 years of church history and missions history, which brings us up to the end of the 1700s, the end of the 18th century, and brings us to the time of Andrew Fuller and William Carey. And it is here that, and I would not assume that in a class this size that every one of us is Southern Baptist. I wouldn't not even assume that every one of us is Baptist. But for those of us who are Baptist, this is where we find our mission roots with William Carey, Andrew Fuller, and the particular Baptists of England. And what we see take place in William Carey's day, it makes its way, these ideas, this passion begins to sweep across the Atlantic to North America with the result of the establishment of the Triennial Convention in 1814, which was the immediate forerunner of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so here's where we find our roots as Baptists, certainly for us as Southern Baptists in terms of missions. And so with our next lecture, we will be looking there at number 8, William Carey and the English Baptists. And spend some time there, bring that right up to the Southern Baptist Convention, the establishment of the Triennial Convention, then the Southern Baptist Convention. We're going to walk through the history of the Southern Baptist Foreign Mission Board / International Mission Board. Excuse me. And bring this right up to the present. And there's some interesting stories and some really, I think, fascinating information I'll be able to share with you as we think about missions in the Southern Baptist context. And then we're going to bring it right up to the present. And we're going to kind of step back and take kind of a cameo shot, kind of a snapshot of the world as it is today in the 21st century in 2018. We're going to kind of go continent by continent and look at both the challenges that we face in contemporary missions and also the opportunities. And that will bring us up to the end of the material for exam number 1. All right? So that's where we've been. That's where we're headed.